bienvenidos a Real Faith Live. I'm so glad that you're here to join us today. Do not worry, the show is not in Spanish, but we wanted to remind you we have tons of Spanish resources. We want to showcase those for you today. So if you're a Spanish speaker or you know someone that speaks Spanish, lives in Latin America, remember that all of our sermons now are subtitled in Spanish on our YouTube channel. They're also subtitled in Portuguese, if you speak Portuguese. And we have a whole part of our website that is dedicated to our Spanish resources. It's called Real Español. I know that's not a good translation. It should be Español de verdad, but that's okay. Just go along with it. It's all on our website for free. Lots of amazing resources in Spanish. I absolutely love the part of my job where I get to help translate all of these things and see it reach all over the world to touch people's lives and help them grow in their relationship with the Lord. So if you have not checked it out, go to realfaith.com/realespanol and take a look at everything that we are doing this holiday season for our partners in Mexico and Latin America who are spreading the gospel there. We're supporting them, and we have a special way that we're doing that. So for the past couple of years, we have been partnering with a church in Hermosillo, Mexico. It's about 6 hours south of Phoenix by car. We have friends there, Pastors Tony and Edna, and they are amazing. They have a couple of kids as well, and they have built just an amazing church in Hermosillo that serves not only that city, but also the surrounding region. Pastor Tony is the head of a church planning network, and he trains and develops leaders and pastors all throughout Mexico, helps them to just grow their churches and reach more people with the gospel. They also partner with children's centers and women's shelters and all sorts of amazing ministries. And so we would love to bless them, that whole organization of people, this Christmas season. We are asking you to help us with this. So you can go to realfaith.com and click on the donate button, and there's a little tab you can click called missions. And all the money that gets given toward that this month, we will be sending down to Mexico to Pastor Tony and his team and their partners so that they can continue to share the gospel in Mexico. They desperately need it right now. It's just so important to keep pushing this gospel forward through these different ministries and pastors, and they have been a blessing to us, and we would like to bless them. So if you feel called to give, please do so at realfaith.com this month of November. One of the projects that Pastor Tony is working on right now is actually building a brand new, big, awesome church building in Hermosillo. It'll house a couple hundred people. They've made great progress on it so far, but they're so excited to be able to reach the community. It'll be an outpost of the kingdom in Hermosillo. They'll have kids programs and life groups and classes, and of course Saturday, Sunday services, and they are making good headway with this, but they need some help. So one of the things that your money will go towards this month is helping finish out that building project to be a blessing to the whole community. So we will show you more photos of that as we get progress updates, but yeah, we would love for you to be a part of building that church in Hermosillo. Thank you so much in advance for your generosity. We are so grateful to those of you that help us get Bible teaching out financially, and for those of you that pray for Real Faith Ministries. We so much appreciate it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. As you consider whether or not you want to be a part of this campaign or not, I want to share a little testimony with you from Tony and Edna down in Hermosillo. They say, I wanted to update you that this Sunday we had a beautiful celebration at church. We baptized several people and finished with a celebratory meal. God is very good. We also had a big gathering for our youth and have been growing our kids program. It is so encouraging to hear about this growth in all areas of the church. We would love for you to be a part of supporting Tony and Edna. Also, we have an amazing brand new product for you this month. For your gift of any amount, we would love to give you Pastor Mark's newest book. He's going to tell you a little bit more about it.
Well, howdy, my name is Pastor Mark Driscoll, and I'm super excited to tell you about a project that has been more than a decade in the making. 10 years ago, I had the honor of co-authoring with Dr. Gary Bashir's book called Doctrine, and this is a special revised limited 10-year anniversary edition. It's gone from 13 to 12 chapters. It has the same theological convictions, but a lot more depth in certain areas. I'm not exactly sure, maybe 50 to 60% of the content in this edition differs from the first edition. As you teach through books of the Bible over the course of a decade, you pick up a few new insights. I would love to get this in your hand. It's kind of a culmination of 25 years of preaching verse by verse through books of the Bible, and it's very readable. It does cover the big topics, and I try to follow the storyline of the Bible is what Dr. Bashir's and I try and do. We start at creation, we move all the way through to the kingdom of God and the second coming of Jesus Christ, and so it follows the storyline of the Bible. It's readable readable enough that if you are a Christian, maybe a small group leader, a youth leader at your church, you'll understand it. It's readable. I've translated nerd into English for you. You're welcome. And if you are a pastor or a missionary or somebody who's in Bible college, seminary, or even my kids who are high school age, this works for them as well. And so you can find all of this at realfaith.com, which is the Bible preaching ministry, where I give away tons of Bible teaching. And we're going to give this to you as well as a free ebook. If you go to realfaith.com, I'll just go ahead and put it in the store. And if you want to give it a look, feel free, use it, get the word out. My whole goal is just to help people learn God's word. And if you give a gift of any amount, we'll send you a free copy, printed, nice, ready to go. Hopefully in time for Christmas. Pray for the supply chain. And thank you to everyone who allows me to help you learn God's word. As we like to say here on the cover, it's all about Jesus. Always has been, always will be.
We hope you grab a copy of that amazing resource. Now get ready for the sermon, which you've all been waiting for. Get a Bible, and here's Pastor Mark.
Well, howdy. We are in James chapter 5. We tend to go through books of the Bible. This book of the Bible is written by Jesus' kid brother, and it's 5 chapters, so we're nearing the end. And if you've got a Bible, find your place in James chapter 5. And he's a real practical guy. He's talking about how faith works in life. And today, the question that we're going to answer is, how does faith work with your wealth? And so I was thinking about it. Probably most of us, at least us guys, we carry a wallet around. And usually it's credit cards. And every once in a while, there's a little cash in the wallet. And on the back of the, or on the front, I should say, the cash, it says this. No, actually, it's on the back. It says, in God we trust. It doesn't say that on my credit cards. I checked. It doesn't say that. There's nothing about God on my credit cards. There are a lot of numbers, so maybe it belongs to Satan. But nonetheless, the way it works is, I was thinking about it. When it comes to our wealth and our money says, in God we trust. I started wondering, where did we start that? And so I did a little bit of research, and it was during the course of the Civil War. So our war, the war in our country is literally just destroying our country. People are killing one another, and they're the same citizens of the same nation, and we were in grave peril. And so there was this religious return to God, saying that the only way that we can have a unified nation is if we're under the lordship of God. And so what happened around that time, where there was a pastor, it was actually, curiously enough, on this date in 1861, a pastor in Pennsylvania, his name was M.R. Walkeson, wrote a letter to the government saying, we need to get God on our currency because we can't survive as a nation unless we submit and surrender ourselves to the Lord. Imagine sending a letter to the government and they do something. I mean, we're in the miracle category here. And so what happens is, there was a secretary named Chase, and he is actually a relative of one of our pastors and my son-in-law, Landon. So this was a relative of his, was the secretary, probably of the treasury or something, and actually wrote back to the pastor. And he said this, he said, "Dear sir, no nation can be strong except in the strength of God, or safe except in his defense. The trust of our people in God should be declared on our national coins." So then the mint in Philadelphia was commissioned to pick a motto. And then in 1861, the motto was chosen. In 1864, "In God We Trust" started to appear on American coins. And then in 1951, we started to put it on bills. Ever since, our currency says, "In God We Trust." And even the money that we spend, it connects our faith and our wealth. How does our relationship with God inform, direct, and change our relationship with our wealth and finances? And so we're going to talk about this today. And if you're saying, gosh, thank you, Pastor Mark. I love it when I go to church and they talk about money. I love that. Thank you so much. I was hoping we would talk about my money and how I should give more away. Well, you're welcome. That's exactly where we're going. And part of what underlies this is there's a powerful myth in our culture that some things are sacred and other things are secular, meaning some things belong to God and other things belong to us. This concept that Jesus Christ right now is seated on a throne, high and exalted, ruling and reigning as Lord, means he's over everyone and everything, so there's nothing that is secular and doesn't belong to him. Everything is sacred and ultimately belongs to him. I'll give you an example. So here we are in church and we call this the Lord's house. But the truth is, if you're a Christian, your house is also the Lord's house. It belongs to the Lord. You should consecrate it to the Lord. You should use it in service to the Lord. You should pray to the Lord. You should sing to the Lord. You should do the same stuff in your house that we do with our house. And if you got kids, that means get some bouncy houses. So, our house is the Lord's house, but your house is the Lord's house. And sometimes people say, well, I'm in full-time ministry. If you're a Christian, you're in full-time ministry. Now, you may not be working at the church. You may be a mom, but a mom has a ministry. And it is more than full-time. And if you're an electrician or a plumber or a mortgage broker, if you're doing it unto the Lord, it's your ministry. It's the place that God has given you to love and serve and help and bless people. And so all of God's people are in ministry, whether or not it's vocational and it is formal. In addition, what happens is sometimes we think, well, my money, that's secular, that belongs to me. No, it belongs to the Lord. And the point when it comes to our wealth is this, and I'm talking about our money, our investments, our equity, your car, your home, your assets, your cash flow. You can either worship your money as your God, or you can worship your God with your money. It's very simple. And so what we're talking about here in James, and we'll jump into chapter 5 in just a minute, he's picking up on a major theme from his big brother Jesus. When Jesus was on the earth, about 25% of his teaching was about finances and stewardship and wealth and saving and investing. And Jesus said this, no servant can serve two masters, Luke 16:13. He will either hate the one and love the other, or he'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. So what Jesus says is, either I'm the priority or money is the priority, and you got to pick, because if you love money, you're going to hate me, and if you love me, you will use your money differently. So what we're going to look at is James picking up on this theme from his big brother Jesus. We're going to look at three perspectives on wealth and possessions. One is selfishness, the other is stealing, and the third is serving or stewarding. So the first one is selfishness. James 5, 1 through 3, what's mine is mine. What's mine is mine. Come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidenced against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure in the last days. So he's talking about selfishness here, and selfishness is what's mine is mine. I'm not going to share it with you. I'm not going to lend it to you. I'm not going to bless you. You get what you get, and I keep what I've got. Selfishness. This is where we generally start. And here he's talking about the rich. He talked about the rich in chapter 1 as well. We tend to think, when it comes to finances and wealth, in two categories, and we instead need to think in four. We tend to think in terms of rich and poor because our mindset has been skewed by progressivism, liberalism, socialism, Marxism. And the result is we tend to think of the rich and the poor, the oppressor and the oppressed, the bourgeois and the proletariat. God has four categories: godly rich and godly poor, ungodly rich and ungodly poor. And so some people are rich and they love the Lord, and others are rich and they don't love the Lord, and some are poor and they love the Lord, and some are rich and they don't love the Lord. The issue is not, are you rich or poor? The question or issue is, are you godly or ungodly with how you get your wealth and what you do with it? When he's talking about the rich here, he's talking about the ungodly rich. There are godly rich people in the Bible. I'll give you three quick examples. In the Old Testament, there's a guy named Boaz. He's very rich, he's very godly. He owns a company. He owns a lot of land. He's very successful. His employees literally sing his praises. They love this guy. He's very generous. He's very honest. He's a great business owner. I hope and pray if you are a business owner, you'd be a great business owner. And his employees love him and they love working for him. And what happens is a gal shows up. Her name's Ruth. She comes from a really tragic family line of abuse and horror and tragedy. She's a Moabite, and she joins God's people, and she's trying to be with God's people, so she moves into the nation of Israel. And she shows up at his field, and she is absolutely destitute, poor, and broke. And what he says is, protect her, nobody harm her, none of you guys take advantage of her, make sure we're generous toward her, give additional generosity to her to go home and give to her mother-in-law. They're both widows. Boaz is a very wealthy man, and he's a very godly man. And he's a very generous man. And he marries her, and they have a child, and through them comes David, and through their family comes Jesus. In the days of Jesus, there was a very godly rich guy named Joseph of Arimathea. It was prophesied in Isaiah that Jesus would be buried with a rich in his death. Jesus was poor, he died. Joseph of Arimathea was rich, gave Jesus his tomb. He's godly rich. In the days of Paul in the New Testament, there was a woman named Lydia, business owner, very successful, very good with money. She's a great leader, and she sees that God is working through Paul, and he's on the front line, so she puts herself on the supply line, and she is a very generous donor to Paul's ministry. The point is, there are rich people who use their money for God. There are rich people who use their money against God. He's here talking about the ungodly rich. And what he says about them is this, that God has been generous to them, but they've not been generous to others. Okay? So we're in America. Just true or false, are we the rich or the poor? We're rich. Let me say this. If you're under 25 and you've been brainwashed in what we call college, you will be told that you're suffering and poor. Just visit another country and know that a bad day here is a good day there. Right? That's why even people who hate this country aren't leaving. Right? And there's a reason why we have to secure our borders for people coming in and not going out. That God has, that we live in a country where we've got it good. We've got it better than most places in the history of the world and right now presently on planet Earth. So when we think of the rich, we tend to compare ourselves to those who are above us. We need to compare ourselves to historically and globally where we are positionally. And so what he's talking about here are the ungodly rich. And what he's saying is God's been generous to you, but you've not been generous to God and others. And what he's talking about here is hoarding. And that is you've got more than you can even use, and you're not looking for anyone to share it with. And he gives 3 examples. He says the clothes in your closet, they're literally moth-eaten, they're rotting. You have so many clothes, you can't even wear them all. And rather than taking clothes and saying, well, I'm going to give them to somebody who doesn't have clothes, I'm going to just keep all my clothes and buy more clothes and fill up my closet and fill up another closet. And there's no problem with having clothes. And I just want to thank you for wearing them. We're all grateful for that. If you want to know, is Pastor Mark anti-clothes? No, I'm pro-clothes. I'm really thank you. Okay, we're not anti-clothes, but the point is, there's a point where you have so much that you can't even use all that you've got. And if at that point you're not thinking about others who could use it, there's something wrong in your soul. In addition, he talks about their silver and gold. It's corroding. And what he's saying is this, you've got so much wealth set aside, you could never possibly use it. For some of us, we've got money in the bank, we've got equity, we've got stocks and savings and investment, we've got great real estate portfolio. Let me just say this. I know some people are struggling, but we're in Scottsdale. And some people aren't struggling. And the point is, if you have more than you need, why don't you look at opportunities to help others and to be generous toward them? And that's what he's saying. He's saying, God has given you all of this, and your eyes are closed to the needs of others. And you're going to let clothes just literally fall apart in your closet, and you're going to let your money just corrode in the safe, and you're not going to share it with anyone who has need. And what he says is, God is watching. 3 times here in this section, he talks about eternity and judgment. And he says this in verse 1, he says, miseries are coming upon you. Verse 3, fire in the last days. And verse 5, a day of slaughter. This is strong language. What he says is, you fattened yourself for the day of slaughter. And what happens is, he's saying, there are people who are starving, and then there are other people who are gorging. And those who are gorging are enlarging themselves, and they're thinking, man, I'm really living the fat life. And what he's saying is, that's exactly what the cow thinks before they're taken to the slaughterhouse. Look at how big I am. What a great life I've lived. And then there's a big change all of a sudden. And what he's saying is, ultimately, when we die and stand before the Lord Jesus or he returns, some of us are just fattening ourselves for the day of slaughter. Now, as we say all of this, there's something in us that immediately wants to bristle and push back. And there's something in some of us that immediately wants to turn this into a political issue and not a biblical issue. As I say this, those of you, and I love you, I'm on your team, but those of us that are over on the right, we tend to think that anything that says that we should give generously must be socialistic, must be liberal, must be democratic. And the truth is, no, this has nothing to do with politics. This is written to the church, God's people. What he's not saying is you should vote for liberals who steal people for money and redistribute it and call that generosity. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is, as an individual, you got to look at your heart and your life and your finances and wealth and possessions, the people around you, and ask, am I reflecting God's heart toward people, or am I just being selfish? Am I taking everything that God has given me and just using it for me instead of sharing it with them? This is not a political issue. This is a Christian issue. This is how we treat one another. See, the Roman government wasn't going to read James and say, oh my gosh, we need to redo some things. In the same way, right now, the White House is not listening to this sermon. They don't care. Right? But this isn't for the government, this is for the church. And I don't expect people who don't know God to act like God, but God's people should be generous and have God's heart. And this is more about how we treat one another. And this isn't about government or regulation or requirement or voting for someone to take from them and give to them. This is about the Holy Spirit showing you the need of someone in front of you and you helping them out of love for them because they're part of the family of God. And so what he's saying here is that ultimately there is an invisible connection between our wallet and our heart. Now you can't see it, but God can. Here's my wallet, here's my heart. And what Jesus says, where your treasure is, your heart will be. See, James here is picking up a theme from his big brother, and he's saying, how you spend your money says a lot about who you are. You could tell me that you are a person who loves God and God is first in my life. And if he's not first in your budget, that's not true. You could say that you have faith that God will provide, but if you don't give, that's not true. That ultimately, how we spend really tells us a lot about who we are. And so ultimately, when it comes down to it, rather than thinking in terms of economics and governments and political parties and elections and tax brackets, let's just look at our own heart. Let's just say, okay, in regards to wealth, that connection that Jesus talks about and that James refers to between treasure and heart, where is my heart? Where is my heart? So I'm going to share with you what I call 8 money personalities, okay? And you got to figure out which you are and which you want to be. And oftentimes what happens when you grow up in a family, however that family handled finances and wealth, you see it as normal, and then you get married and you realize that someone else and their family was different, and then you have marital conflict. True or false? Sometimes we fight about money in marriage. The hoarder is the person who money gives me safety. Sometimes you'll read a story where somebody dies and they're in squalor and they've got millions in the bank. You're like, what were they doing? Why? Why did they take the bus and, only eat top ramen and live in a trailer? They had millions in the bank. Because for them, money is safety. If I've got enough money, no matter what happens, I'll be okay. The second money language is the spender. Money gives me rewards. This is where you treat yourself. I've had a hard day. I'm going to go buy clothes. I'm going to go out to eat. I'm going to take myself on a vacation. I'm going to buy myself a car. And if you've had a hard day, you decide that you're going to reward yourself with money, going out to buy something or give you some sort of activity, go to the casino, go out to a concert, go to a sporting event, none of which is sinful or wrong, but this is how we get into debt. We feel like we have a lot of hard days, so we spend a lot. This is where credit cards come in. And the number one, I've not offended yet, so this is the point where I'll begin. So the number one person to have credit card debt that is highest commensurate to their income is young women in their 20s. I've had a hard day, I've had another hard day, have another hard day, have another hard day. You ladies have had a lot of hard days, and you're buying shoes and purses to look fabulous to meet a guy who has a job sufficient to pay off your credit card debt. Right? See, the men laugh and the women are like, don't tell them. Okay? Little secret, spoiler alert. The avoider is the third one. The avoider is, money stresses me out, it freaks me out, I'm not good at math, I don't understand, things are tight, I just don't deal with it. Some of you grew up in families where the bills came and your parents put them in a drawer. They just ignore it. They're like, well, you know what, maybe Jesus will come back before it's due. I don't know, maybe we'll just see. No need to pay it right away. And until a bill showed up that was all in red, they weren't even opening it or paying attention. Some of you are avoiders. If I asked you right now, like, where are you at financially? You'd be like, somewhere. I don't know. These are the people that for them, what they consider accounting is going to the ATM and then seeing how much money they have and taking it out. That is for them reconciliation of their books. They avoid it. The next one is the hater. You hate money, you hate bills, you don't like to talk about it, you don't like to think about it, right? This is like your least favorite sermon of all time. And if a bucket comes by, you're probably going to throw up in it. Okay, that's where you're at, right? And so what happens with a hater is sometimes you've been broke for so long, you don't even want to think or talk about it, or you've seen people use and abuse money and you've only seen it used negatively, and as a result, it's just left a real sick taste in your mouth. Another one is the manipulator. People give so that you'll be obligated to them, that you'll owe them. They're like marionettes, and the money always comes with strings. Okay, well, hey, I lent you money, you owe me a favor. Hey, when a conflict comes, I need you to take my side. Hey, when we were at work, I let you borrow my car, so you need to, side with me in the war against the boss or help me with a performance review. The manipulator it's never grace-based giving. It's always, you are now obligated to me. The borrower is slave to the lender. It's not grace-based. And some of you don't even know that you have this kind of relationship with someone until they give you something and then later on they want to cash in your obligation. And let me just say this to the parents of adult children. This is how you destroy your relationship with your child. If you give in an effort to manipulate and control. Okay, we'll give you this money, but you got to spend it X, Y, Z. We're going to give you this money, but here's what you need to do with it. We're going to give you this money, but then we get a right to have a voice into your relationship, your marriage, or your family. Nope. What I would tell you then is don't take the money. Unless it's grace-based, and it's fine for a parent to give generously to an adult child and then to give them advice or wisdom. Hey, here's my recommendation. But as soon as you turn it into a law or a rule, you're no longer giving, you're controlling. You're no longer giving, you're manipulating. You're no longer giving, you're abusing. And so the manipulator is the one that they'll give you money, but there's going to be a high price to pay in some form or fashion. In addition, there is the flaunter. This is the person that they spend money to demonstrate social success. So they're going to spend money so that everyone thinks that they're very successful. There's no problem driving a nice car. There's no problem living in a nice house. It doesn't bother me in the least. But this is where we get into massive debt because we spend money we don't have to impress people we don't know. And in Scottsdale, just so you know, this happens a lot. Right? People are like, oh my gosh, how do they afford that car? They didn't. The reason they're driving fast is the guy who's going to repossess it is chasing them. That's why they're driving fast. They can't afford that. Okay, and so there's nothing wrong with having nice things, but what's the motive of the heart? Is the motive of the heart like, oh my gosh, look at what they have? That's a problem. And I'll be honest, drive what you want, wear what you want. I don't care whose name's on your underwear. I'm not checking. It's none of my business. But you got to check your own heart. In addition, there's the scorekeeper. There are people that money is like video games or sports. Like they keep, I need to win, you need to lose. So what interest rate did you get? I got a better one. How's your portfolio performing? Oh, I beat you. So what was your bonus? Oh, my bonus was higher. How's your whole house doing? What's your equity? Mine's up. Or how much per square foot? And it is good to be a steward, but for the scorekeeper, it's not about stewarding God's resources. It's about defeating other people through keeping of score. And these are the people you find them when you tell them, hey, I got a raise. They tell you they got a bigger raise. Hey, we sold our house, we made 20%. Nothing, I made 23%. It always feels like a competition, and they're keeping score. And then the last one is the giver. The giver is the person who says, I don't love money, I love people, and I love God. So I use money to show my love to God and people. And the giver is the person who's looking for opportunity to take what God has put into their hand and to put it into someone else's hand. How many of you, as we look at this list, you look at your family history? And if you are married, you got to have this conversation. Because oftentimes we come with two different perspectives on possessions, and it leads to a lot of conflict in the marriage. And sometimes we don't even consider the family we grew up in and the way they dealt with their wealth. Was that godly or ungodly? In addition, the culture that you set regarding finances and wealth, if you are a parent, it's going to be what your children consider normative. And they're going to assume that that's normal because that's all they've ever known. As a result, this becomes generational and really important. But the issue that I would ask is, where's your heart? Are you selfish? The second category that he deals with is going beyond selfishness to stealing. Selfishness is what's mine is mine. Stealing is what's yours is mine. What's yours is mine. Not only do I have a right to mine, I have a right to yours. And we've got a whole generation that thinks that this is a good idea. And they vote for people to steal. Here's what he says about that. James 5, 4 and 6. Behold, the wages of the laborers, so these are the hard-working, daily, put your boots on, go to work guys, who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, are crying out against you. And the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. That's the God who rules over the unseen realm, angels and demons. You have lived on the earth in luxury, self-indulgence. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the righteous person, and he does not resist you. Selfishness is what's mine is mine. Stealing is what's yours is mine. What's yours is mine. And what he's talking about here are two classes or categories of people. One is the landowner, the other is the laborer. Now, the landowner is here the ungodly rich, and here the laborer is the godly poor. And so I'll give you a little bit of a background on this in their day. The way it would work is that the laborer would work through the harvest. So it's an agrarian society. You're working outside. Nobody got paid until harvest time, because harvest time is where we harvest whatever the crop might be, we cash it in and pay everyone out. And what he says is the laborers have worked all season. They've worked very hard. They got the job done. They finished the harvest, and now you don't pay them. How many of you have ever completed a job and someone didn't pay you? If you own a business, does this happen? This happens all the time. If you are an employee, this happens some of the time. You're like, I finished the job, I'm not going to pay you. You're not going to pay me? Well, I earned it. Well, go get an attorney. I can't afford an attorney. You didn't pay me. Okay, then you lose. And that's what was happening in this scenario. The ungodly rich were powerful, and the godly poor were powerless. The godly rich ruled the courts. They had legal rights. The ungodly rich ruled the courts, and the godly poor, they were ruined by the courts. The godly rich had legal status that the laborer didn't. And plus, you can afford an attorney if you're rich, and you can if you're poor. This is where a lot of the times we believe in a culture and a society of justice, but if they can lawyer up and you can't, that's not a fair fight. They're coming with a gun and you're coming with a Nerf gun. You're not going to win that fight. In addition, the ungodly rich were attacking the godly poor, but the godly poor, he says they don't resist. They're not fighting back. right? This is one guy comes in fist pounding, the other guy hands down saying, I don't want to fight. I just want to get paid for the job that I did. You said you would pay me. He's just looking for that which is right. In addition, the ungodly rich, they're like Caesar's family. Caesar's family in that day ruled over the Roman Empire, and they were like a mafia crime family. They did whatever they want. They were above the law. They'd steal your land. They'd tax you. They'd kill you. They'd imprison you. They were all crooks. The godly poor, that was James' family. That was Jesus' family. Their dad was Joseph. He's a carpenter, construction worker. They live in a small town. They're married as teenagers. James' mom and dad are Mary and Joseph. When it came time for their family to go to the temple and to offer a sacrifice, there was a sacrifice that was supposed to be given, but there was an exception in God's law for the poor, and they were allowed to give a smaller, lesser sacrifice. James' mom and dad gave that sacrifice. They gave the sacrifice to the poor people because they were the poor people. And James is looking at this going, my dad was poor, my mom was poor, my brother was poor, I'm poor, we're poor, but we're godly. Like my brother was God. That's first round draft pick of godly right there. And these people are ungodly, and they're using all of their wealth and power to abuse. And that's wrong. And what he says is that those who are ungodly rich, they're fattening themselves for the day of slaughter. But here's what I really love. He says for the godly poor that God has heard their cries. See, the good news is they can't afford a lawyer, but God is a God of grace, which means he goes to work for free. And all you got to do is pray. You don't need to schedule a meeting, and you don't need to fill out a retainer. I have nothing against lawyers. But at the end of the day, sometimes just praying to God is really how to get something done. And the question is, well, does God show up in business affairs and financial dealings? He sure can, because he's Lord over all. There's no sacred and secular. It's not like God's in heaven going, I don't do finances, I don't do courts, I don't do contracts, I don't do law. I'm the Lord. I do whatever I want. That's what he does. And so these who are poor, too poor to get legal defense, have God be their defender. It's fine to have an attorney. It's fine to have contracts. It's fine to paper it up. I encourage all of that. But at the end of the day, sometimes you just need to go to the Lord and say, Lord, you rule and reign. The Bible says that you are a judge. I'm asking you to render a verdict and to bring me justice. And God does that for them. Here's the big idea. You and I will either love money and we will use people, or we will love people and we will use money. And this is really your heart. Again, don't turn this into left versus right. Don't turn this into red versus blue. Don't turn this into governmental economic theory. Let this be your heart demonstrated with your wealth. This is between you and God. And in saying this, every one of us has some sort of family history that involves or informs how we see finances, wealth, and possessions. I'll share a little bit of my story, maybe just to let you get to know me a little bit. So I'm Irish. We were the O'Driscolls. O'Driscoll literally means messenger of God. It means preacher. And we're not I'm the first one. So, so I don't know what happened. I mean, it was almost a false prophecy. I mean, it was almost. And so our family comes from County Cork in Southern Ireland. And honestly, we have been rich and poor at various points in my family's history. A lot of times these categories are not fixed. Paul says, I know what it is to be rich and I know what it is to be poor. He's like, I've been both. So our family, for some years in County Cork, Southern Ireland, we were very rich. We were landowners. We had castles, maybe multiple. I've been there with my dad. And we were wealthy, and we were Catholic. And then when a Protestant leader would come in, we would get dispossessed, kicked out. Now we're poor. And so on one occasion, when we were dispossessed and poor, we robbed, my family rowed out into Baltimore Harbor and robbed a wine ship, a ship filled with wine from Spain. So we were rich. Let me ask you a question. Were we godly? No. Anytime you steal a ship filled with wine You're ungodly. It was so bad that we touched off an international incident. Spain sent invaders to take Irishmen as slaves and hostages to pay back what we stole. That's my family. So we get stuff done. Not always good, but we get stuff done. So we were rich, and then we became poor, and then we became rich again, but we were ungodly rich. Well, then the potato famine hit in Ireland, and it's hard to get records. I've been there with my dad, and the records in Dublin were destroyed in a fire. But as far as we can tell, famine hit. A lot of my family was very poor, and then the famine hit. Now we're literally starving to death. And so many of my relatives literally starved to death. And some, in an effort to not starve to death, moved into sort of assistance homes where you would have a bed and something to eat, and they died of typhoid. So the result is 2 men in my family line, I can't figure it out, but it seems like their wives died, their kids, because it's grown men, and they have no family, they have nothing. So in an effort to save themselves, these 2 men, they walked from County Cork up to Dublin. It's about a 200-mile walk. This is my family. You know you're in desperate shape when you come to the conclusion, like, this country has no hope for me. And so they walked up to Dublin. They boarded something called a coffin ship. And a coffin ship is called that because it was made to transport goods, not human life. And so people just died on the coffin ships, but that's all they could afford. So they climbed into the coffin ship. Many died. They lived. They landed in New York, went through the legal immigration process, became naturalized U.S. citizens, walked through the process that was required. The Irish weren't really welcome in New York, and so they had to figure out where to go. So we ended up in Grand Forks, North Dakota. And we ended up in Grand Forks, North Dakota, potato farming. What else would Irishmen do? They get remarried, they have kids, they start potato farming. Very, 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 very poor, working very, very, very hard. Over generations, a family business got built. Now there's a farm, there's a lot of land, there's a potato farm. In addition, there's an earth-moving company. We're building roads, we got government contracts, we've got machines, we've got employees. There's a large family business. Poor, rich, so to speak. And then ensuing generations were bad stewards. They drank and spent all the money, sold the equipment, killed the companies, sold off the farm. That's where I was born. I was born in Grand Forks, North Dakota. And when I was little, my mom and dad knew that there was not going to be any opportunity for me and for our family. And so we left that place. And the family farm has since been sold and everything's gone. And so we went west where there was work. My dad was a carpenter, construction worker, like James and Jesus' dad. His name was Joseph, and he swung a hammer for a living. My mom and dad got married around the age of 20, had me around 21. There's no work. My parents are very, very poor. I would say they were godly poor. They're the kind of people that James is talking about, and they're like his family. My parents worked very hard and honestly for their money. They spent it very judiciously, and they shared it very generously. So my mom and dad are probably watching, and it's really nice to honor them with the kind of parents that they were and are, and the kind of people that they were and are. And I was getting ready to teach this, and so I called my dad today, and I said, hey, Dad, I call him Pops. Hey, Pops, any interesting stories you could share? Because we come from a line of laborers. Here in James, he talks about the laborers. My grandpa George, my mom's dad, he was a diesel mechanic. My dad was a drywaller, and one of my first jobs, I was a longshoreman. So laborers, we're working. And my dad said, yeah, when you were little, Marky, they still call me Marky, he said, your mom would stay home with you, and I would get work wherever I could find it. And so he would go out of town, sometimes out of state, to hang drywall, and he would work all week. And he said, I would send all the money home to you and Mom, and I would sleep in the truck or I would sleep on the sheetrock stack. That's my dad. Until my dad literally snapped his back, feeding his family. My dad hung drywall into his mid-40s. men just don't do that. He's tough. We're not afraid of work. And he said, Mark, there was one time that he said there was a guy that hired us, and he said he wasn't a bad guy or crook, but he was a little broke. And so the joke was on Friday, he would, at lunch, give everybody their paycheck, and the dudes would jump in their truck and drive as fast as they could to the bank because the last guy probably was going to have his check bounce. And I said, Dad, was there ever a time like James 5 where somebody in power took advantage of you because you didn't have that much power? And he said, yeah, there was one time where they were hanging sheetrock by the foot. Usually get paid by the hour. Getting paid by the foot is a hard way to make a living. And he said, I was doing good. A couple other guys weren't making it, and we're all trying to feed our families. And we're sleeping at the job site, and we're sending the money back to our wives and kids. And he said, so I talked to the boss and just told him, hey, a couple of these guys are having a hard time feeding their families. And he said, well, then you're fired. He fired my dad. And there was no work. We were really poor. And so my dad came home and went to file for unemployment, and the guy lied and said my dad quit. So now my dad's got an 8-week appeal process for his unemployment when there's no work. I'm 3 or 4 years of age. My sister's probably 1 or 2. My dad's 23, 24 years of age, feeding 2 kids. And he's like, I got fired. I didn't quit. There's no work. 8 weeks is a long time to fight for your unemployment benefits. And I'll never forget, I was talking to my dad about it today, and he reminded me, and I still remember this day as a little boy. He had a truck. He had an old used Ford truck that my dad would work. My dad would get up in the morning, put his steel-toed boots on, Levi's on, white T-shirt. He would roll up his cigarettes in the sleeve like Fonzie. He doesn't do that anymore. He met Jesus, so he's doing good. So, and he had a hard hat and a thermos and a lunchbox and a toolbox. My dad would get up before the sun and go to work to feed his family. And he would go in his truck. He saved up and he bought a used Ford, I think it was a Ford pickup. And I remember that truck because he would take me in it in the cold, freezing winters, and I would open the heater vent and I would sit by it and warm up. And I'll never forget, my dad couldn't afford to pay our housing payment because the guy who was his boss fired him but said he quit, so he couldn't get unemployment. And I'll never forget the day that somebody came to our house and I saw my dad fill out paperwork and hand him the keys to the truck. And that was my dad's truck, and I would ride in the truck with my dad. I'd put my boots on. I'd get my little toolbox or my lunchbox. And sometimes my dad would take me to the side jobs with him, and that was our truck. And I saw somebody get in the truck and start to drive away. And I looked at my dad and I was like, Dad, what are they doing? They're taking your truck. He's like, it's not my truck anymore. So I had to sell it so that we could pay for our housing this month. Otherwise, we're homeless. It was $160. So my dad now has no job. My dad has no truck. And I remember as a little boy when it would get really cold and we couldn't afford heating oil. We'd heat with an old heating oil furnace. You'd wear your coat in the house. You'd wear layers in the house during the winter. And if it was cold, you would turn the stove on and you would open the door to the stove just to get warm for a few minutes, and that's how you would heat yourself. I grew up in a godly poor home. I can still remember when we were kids. Eventually there was 5 of us. My mom stayed home with all 5 of us kids, and my dad literally, like I said, hung sheetrock till he broke his back feeding his family. We walked into this neighborhood we moved into was a first-generation immigrant family. It's right next to an airport. And so everybody would fly in from around the world, and they would just live there. And so all the nations and all the languages, it was one of the most diverse zip codes and one of the most linguistically diverse zip codes in America. And I remember everybody was poor. And my parents were poor, but they were generous. And so every night my mom would make dinner and she would make extra food because she knew that there were kids in the neighborhood that didn't really have parents that would feed them, and those kids would come to our house for dinner because they knew that there'd be a meal. I was the only kid in my neighborhood that had a dad. One of the great differences in my life is a dad. That's why I'm so committed to men's ministry. And so I remember when school would start, we would go to the Sears Surplus, and you could buy 1 pair of shoes and one coat for the school year as a kid at the Sears surplus, and my mom would always buy extra coats. And I was like, Mom, why are you buying an extra coat? She said, because when the kids come over in our neighborhood, it's raining, it's freezing, they don't have a coat. So my mom was the one who would have extra coats to give them coats. My dad took me to baseball. I tried out for baseball when I was a kid, and I showed up and there was no coach because there were no dads. To the best of my memory, of all the boys who showed up for the baseball team, my dad was the only dad. So my dad became the baseball coach. He never played baseball, but he's the only dad. For years, I saw my dad coach my teams, and boys would show up for tryouts and practice. No cleats, no glove, no bat. Say, we're in Scottsdale. We're in the baseball academy headquarters of the planet. Okay? So my dad, during the off season, we would go to Goodwill. We would go to St. Vincent de Paul, stores like that, and he would look for used baseball gloves, bats, and cleats. And we had a big box at our house, and he would put them in there so that when baseball season come, we could put it in the back of his truck. And when the boys showed up for baseball, they weren't embarrassed because he'd have cleats and a bat and a glove for them. And my dad, out of his own pocket, bought the uniforms and bought the hats so they could look like a team because there was no dads to buy the uniforms for the kids. My parents are very generous. And they've always just kind of been that way. So the home I grew up in is a lot like the home that James is talking about. Poor, but godly. Let me say this too. We were surrounded by people who were poor and ungodly. Drug addiction, prostitution. I grew up Green River Killer and Ted Bundy in my neighborhood. That's where I grew up. I saw a lot of hustling, a lot of scamming the government, a lot of people gaming the system. Just because you're poor doesn't mean you're godly. But my family was poor, but they were godly. The way they worked for their money and the generosity that they demonstrated with their wealth was really incredible. And what I've learned is the house or household you grow up in, as a kid, you think that's normal. So in my house, guess what was normal? Generosity. Grace grew up in a home. Her daddy was a pastor. We've named this church after him. They didn't have a lot of money, but her family was generous. So she had generosity as normal for her. So for us, it's not selfishness and it's not stealing. It's stewarding, which we're going to get into in a minute. For our kids, they grew up in a home of generosity and giving and stewardship. So for them, guess what it is? It's normal. Well, yeah, you enjoy what God gives and you share what God gives. Isn't that what everyone does? If you hear this sermon and what you're hearing bothers you, it's because the home you grew up in or the values you have today, they're broken. They're abnormal. And some of you, I love you, but let me just meddle with you a bit. If you're like, who is the preacher to talk about my money? If you think it's your money, that's the problem. We just exposed your problem. It's not my problem, it's your problem. And it's between you and God. It's actually not between you and me. And so selfishness is what's mine is mine. Stealing is what's yours is mine. We had a lot of that in my neighborhood. Stewardship is what's mine is his. And so that's the last point. He told us this in James 1:16 through 17. Do not be deceived. We all get deceived on these things. My beloved brothers, every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father. First thing he told us in James is everything we have comes from where? It's from God. You're like, oh, that's my car. God's like, actually, that was my car, and you're borrowing it. That's my house. God's like, actually, the whole planet's mine. So I know they make you pay taxes on that section, but it's still mine. And what God is saying is everything you and I have comes down from him. And we need to steward it. So that's where he says in James 4, you desire and you do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly and you spend it on your passions. That's bad stewardship. So stewardship is this. God is the owner, I am the manager. God is the owner, I am the manager. And so the steward understands it from this perspective. All that I am and all that I have belongs to God. Therefore, if I have something, I should thank him and ask him what he wants me to do with it. Okay? God, what do you want me to do? I was thinking about it today. Gracie and I were talking. I never knew why. I've never liked selling cars. We've had cars, been married for a while, and we've sold a few cars, but we've given away far more cars than we've sold. And it never hit me till today. Why? Why do we just give cars away? Because I was a 3 or 4-year-old little boy that saw my dad's truck drive away. And my dad didn't have a car. And if I got a car and I don't, it's not a sin to sell your car. But why not, if they need a car, give them the car. Right, so I gave away a car today. To me, it's, God, it's your car. What do you want me to do with your car? God, it's your income. What do you want me to do with your income? God, it's your retirement. What do you want me to do with your retirement? God, what do you want me to do? Right, most of us, let's just be honest, we got a fridge and a pantry and another fridge in the garage. And we're throwing out food that spoils, and most of us, it wouldn't hurt to lose a few pounds. This is America. We go to Costco and buy things by the pallet. I mean, it is a thing. And what's so wrong with saying, well, Lord, if this is all yours and you've given me more than I need, why am I not looking for people that I can help meet their need? Because oftentimes what we think is, well, God helps, you got to take care of yourself. You know what? God's like, well, I always take care of you. And I'm asking you to take care of them. And this is a hard issue, friends. It really is a hard issue. And the answer is not just to have this settled politically. This needs to be settled personally. And so stewarding wisely is this. Number one, so the two things that work together, stewarding wisely so you can give generously. If you steward wisely but you don't give generously, you're selfish. If you give generously and you don't steward wisely, you're going to bankrupt yourself because you're going to give away what you don't have. Stewarding wisely is give your tithe first and foremost to God. God first. Second, pay your taxes. Jesus paid his taxes. God shows up on the earth and we taxed him. Let me say this. If Jesus got taxed, you're going to get taxed. Okay? Caesar's like, I heard he's the Lord of heaven and earth. Let's go for a percentage of that. That's the thing. So give your tithe to the Lord, first and foremost. Give your taxes to God. Here's a crazy idea. Nuts. Spend less than you make. But, Mark, is this possible? Try. You tell me. And then say, crazy, nuts, just hold your seat, save. Say, what is that? It's not spending. Save. Because guess what's going to happen? Something's going to happen, and you're going to need money. And if you spend it all, you don't have it, then you're in crisis or in debt. So save, and then invest. And invest is for the future. Do you want to retire? Do you want your kids to have a college fund? When you die, do you want to leave something for your kids other than a bumper sticker that says, we're spending their inheritance? Okay? Every time I see that, I want to rear end that car. That's exactly what I want to do. But I don't. I pray for them. You and I live in an absolutely broken world when it comes to finances, and it's because people don't know God. And people who do know God, they don't worship God with their wealth. They worship their wealth as their God. So and if you don't know how to handle your money, there's a guy named Dave Ramsey. I've met Dave. He's a good guy. I like him. I enjoy him. My kids grew up on Dave Ramsey. They accepted him in their heart at about 6 or 7 years of age. And he will help you figure out how to steward your wealth. You need to steward wisely so you can give generously. And that's what James is ultimately driving toward and talking about. And what this is worshiping God with your wealth rather than worshiping your wealth as your God. Now, this will blow your mind. Every single time somebody in the Bible comes to worship, nobody ever comes empty-handed. Because worship is a sacrifice. And if you are a Christian, you don't worship empty-handed, you bring your sacrifice. The Bible speaks of this in terms of tithes and offerings. Tithe is one pocket, offering is the other. Tithe is 10%. Some of you are like, you have to tithe 10%? It means 10%. I didn't write the book, I just studied it. That's what it means. And the tithe is what you give to your church, and then the offering is above and beyond that for missions. Maybe you got a heart for veterans or for first-generation immigrant families or people that are struggling with and battling addiction. Offerings. So the combined total in the Old Testament was between 25 and 27%. Tithe and offering. And so in our home, we set up recurring giving. That's the tithe pocket. Just every week, here's what goes in. And what we do is we say we're going to give to God first, because if we give to God last, we probably won't give to God at all. And Grace has always been great about this. I grew up in a generous family, but I didn't understand giving to the Lord. I understood helping those in need. And Grace's attitude has always basically been, she believes that we can do more with 90% that is blessed by God than 100% that is not. And so tithes and offerings. So we give our tithe, and then we look for opportunities. And we've always been a giving family. My kids love to give. It's just our thing. We really enjoy it. We look for visible needs and opportunities, and we like to give. Now, Forbes and Wallet Hub have named Arizona the least charitable state in the United States of America. And I'll tell you this, we have a lot of Mormons. Okay? And if you're here with your wives, you need Jesus. And they do too. In Mormonism, giving is very legalistic. It's not grace-based. And so in our state, our giving is the lowest, despite a bunch of Mormons who have to give. And so our state is really pretty pathetic. It's actually the worst when it comes to generosity. You're in the least generous state in America. That should discourage us. So what that means is, though, that God has given us an opportunity as His people. If we're generous, that's going to be really different. It's going to be stark in contrast. And so, share a little bit. Some of you would ask, why do we give? We don't give to get a blessing, we give to be the blessing. It's where Jesus says, and it's quoted in Acts, it's more blessed to give than receive. Some of you are like, well, if I give, do I get a blessing? No, your heart is wrong. This is not an investment scheme. This is a worship lifestyle. Giving is the blessing. There's something amazing when somebody has a need and you're like, I love you, here it is. Let me meet that need because I love you. I'll tell you how crazy it is. We're driving to church today. I'll tell you a few stories. Grace gets was it a text or a call? It was a text. There was a gal, she grew up in a legalistic cult, non-grace-based, horrible, and she started working for someone in our church who is affluent, and they're wonderful, they love the Lord, they're godly, and they kept inviting this person to church or to women's ministry, and they never came, and then one day they came, and they were very anxious because they didn't know anybody, and the person who invited them wasn't there, and they're the unbeliever, and so they were crying. And God spoke to my wife, Grace, and said, go over there. She went over there and met them, and she happened to know what their name was. Invited them in. They've been coming to women's. They got sick with COVID, so we gave them money for their single mom, for rent and groceries, and the gals at the table were praying for and giving generously to. And she says, you know what, I've never seen people just be so generous and so kind and do so much for me. And today she gave her life to Christ, and we're going to baptize her soon. Yeah. She got saved today, and you know what it started with? Sometimes people don't understand the whole theology of grace, but generosity is a good introduction. Now, in telling you this, we're approaching the end of our fiscal year as a church, and here's the good news. You guys have been generous. I don't know if you individually have been generous to the Lord, but as a church, overall, you've been generous. So I don't have a big, condemnation or shakedown. I don't. I don't. I don't know why that's funny. I just, it's not like we're putting big guys with tattoos at the door and you got to put your credit card in and we'll pray about an amount on your way out. It's not like that. But what we like to do is we like to be generous so that we can then be generous to people who don't yet know Jesus so they can know about the grace of God. So I'm just happy to report this year we've given away tens of thousands of dollars of Bibles. We bought a brand new studio. The Bible teaching will go out to 110 million people from. We opened a cafe across the way for women's and students and parenting and pre-marriage. And all of that was done in cash because you guys are generous. We made improvements to the kids ministry in the building. And it's been overall a good year. And I'm very, very encouraged and I'm very, very grateful. And I believe if people become givers, it changes their life. Because you don't just give money, you give time. You give prayer, you give compassion, you give grace. And if you're a giver, you can be a forgiver. And ultimately, what we're doing is we're throwing parties, big parties, expensive, just crazy expensive. Like I saw the numbers and man, I was like, okay, I don't know if I have that much faith, but like we throw big expensive parties and we invite people and they show up and they walk around and they're like, why do you do this? The answer is, this is practice for heaven. Our God is a generous God. He's a fun God. Everybody in heaven's glad to be there. Nobody in heaven is like, I miss Detroit. Nobody's saying that. Nobody's saying that. And how much does it cost to go to heaven? $0 because God is a God of grace and he picks up the tab. God pays for his party. So we throw parties and we pick up the tab and tell people that ultimately this gift came down from God. Now, what's been crazy is that has led to an explosion in people getting saved. We've now baptized this year 406 people. This year, which is crazy. None of those people were paying for the Bibles, the ministry, the technology, the parties, the kids ministry. None of them were paying for the study guides or the free Bible study resources. You did. You gave something to them, and it opened their heart, and then God gave them eternal life. And so I just want to say, it's not about the money, it's about the ministry. I don't know about you. It seems like the supply chain is broken. The government has no idea what it's doing. We're headed toward, I think, hyperinflation and a head-on collision. Economically, it looks like misery, but it's good to know that the kingdom of God is still a good investment. Yeah, come on. And so what I want to do, I'm going to bring the band out, and I want to share a story with you because we're seeing people saved every single day. It's incredible. And this is one story from this week. We hear this all the time, and I just want to encourage you with one so the band can come out. I got this letter this week. Dear Pastor Mark, my personal spiritual journey back to God began almost 2 years ago. I won't bore you with the details, but it seemed that I was destined to find your church and you. I had been experimenting and pursuing the path to God through yoga and meditation. It is my 13-year-old daughter who was pushing me toward church and Christianity. I was raised a Christian, had a love for Jesus, but lost my way believing I was intellectually above religion. I did not raise my children with formal religious education. I exposed them to tradition and a smattering of churches and temples, but was fearful of brainwashing or indoctrinating them. It's called parenting. With the promise of a Savior, I wanted them to rely on themselves. Their 13-year-old daughter had been declaring herself as a Christian since being a young girl. I heard her, but did not necessarily encourage her. Fast forward to COVID, my family found ourselves in the midst of unimaginable strain and a surreal experience. My husband is a physician. I'm a school nurse. I was invited to your church by a very trusted friend. One fateful Saturday, the daughter and I agreed to go to your service. It was in the book of James. It was baptism day. That's recent. Your sermon was moving and relevant. My daughter turned her face toward me and said, I want to get baptized. Her father is a brilliant, kind, intellectual, and all-around Renaissance man. He did not like her declaration. My daughter, who adores her father, did not fear, did not cower, and did not deny herself. We kept going to church every Saturday at the 4 p.m. We could not wait for Saturdays to come. She planned her baptism, and her father had to get beyond his beliefs and fears and show up for his daughter and decided to see what she was experiencing. He was moved after his first visit. He came back the next week. He went to her baptism the following week and cried at witnessing her faith and courage. We celebrated her day with family and friends. Anyway, my husband has not been himself for months. I thought maybe he was depressed due to stress, though he denied it. I knew something was not right. He was stubborn and did not take my advice to get formally evaluated. My daughter, she prophesied this, said to me several weeks ago, I know Dad has a brain tumor. Turns out she was correct. Our last visit to Trinity, you spoke about the brevity of life. My daughter grabbed my hand, and we held it tightly for the entire sermon. She knew and has known all along. My husband was somewhere in the church, but not seated with us. Turns out he had to leave immediately after the service due to a horrible headache. I think this was last weekend. That night, I called an ambulance, and we're now facing a new reality. My daughter is a child of God. She has single-handedly brought us to Jesus. She is guiding my husband through his spiritual journey. My husband said, I felt Pastor Mark's sincerity, and he said, I felt his love. Though I could be fearful and devastated for some reason, I feel more joyful than ever. I wake up with a feeling of abundance and gratitude. My life is exploding with Christians at every turn. God is moving us. After crying upon hearing the diagnosis of her dad, the gal said, it's time to pivot. When little girls quote their sermons to their dad, I kind of get choked up. I'm certain that you face hate every day. You face cancel culture and evil forces trying to take our freedom. Please continue to speak the truth. Know that you're guiding us, guiding my precious daughter and husband, and impacting my entire family. We're spreading the good news. Our daughter hopes to meet you in person, although I realize that may not be possible. That will be possible. But know that she loves you. She loves Jesus. She finds her strength in his word, and Trinity is our home. Pastor Darian visited her dad in the hospital this week, and he got saved. He gave his life to Jesus Christ. They wanted to be here tonight, but Dad is in the hospital. He just had a very lengthy brain surgery, and they're praying for his recovery. And here's the family. So let's be praying for them. And if you need prayer for anyone or anything, the prayer team will be in the back. And church family, let me tell you, it's not about the money. It's about the ministry. And we're going to spend some time worshiping our God.
To rest
Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that you enjoyed that sermon and the song. And if you'd like more content like that, you can go to our YouTube channel at Mark Driscoll to check out tons of sermons, questions and answer videos, and worship songs. As we wrap up this show, I would love to pray for all of you that have been watching. Dear Lord, thank you for this great reminder that everything that we have will burn up when we die, and that we are going to die, and that we will face you and be judged. That is a very somber thing to think about. This is a very intense passage, but it is a reminder to all of us that ultimately what matters is that we live our lives for you. We steward our wealth for your glory, Lord, that nothing is about us, that it's all should be about you, Lord. I pray that as we handle our finances this week and going forward, especially in this holiday season where we want to be generous, but sometimes that's difficult. I pray that you would convict us of areas that you want us to grow in a theology and understanding of biblical and righteous finances, Lord, and that we would manage what you've given us well, that we would be faithful with a little so that we can be faithful with even more, Lord, that we would be good stewards of what you've given us no matter how much or what that is, Lord, but that we would honor you and glorify you with our wealth and not do things out of selfish ambition or greed, but just out of serving and loving you and loving others the way that you modeled for us, Jesus on the cross. Thank you so much, Lord. Amen. In light of this passage about wealth, I just wanted to remind you that if you want to be a part of our campaign this month to support churches in Mexico, I talked about it a little bit in the pre-show, but in case you missed that, you can go to realfaith.com on the donate page, and you can help us help other missionaries and pastors in Mexico this holiday season as they bless their communities and just try to get the gospel out all around the world. So if you're looking for a great charity to support this holiday season, to be generous towards, we would encourage you to check that out at realfaith.com. And thank you in advance for your generosity. I'll see you next week.